Leon Todd for G66. Welcome to the first video in a new series we are calling Getting Gig Ready. We're going to be using the VP4 in a variety of different situations. We're going to build some VP4 presets and use it in a variety of different rigs so that I can not only showcase how to use the VP4 in these different rigs, but also explore some awesome combinations of existing guitar gear out there. The first episode, we're going to be focusing on getting gig ready with a Fender amp. And there is no more classic gigging situation than using a Fender Deluxe Reverb with a few pedals. This is arguably the most popular backline amplifier, one of the most popular tube amplifiers ever created, and it works so well with just a few pedals run in front of it and a guitar. It's very easy to set up and very easy to dial in. So before we talk about the VP4 preset, let's just go over a few basics of the Deluxe Reverb. This is my Fender Deluxe Reverb reissue. It's a 22-watt all-tube amplifier with a single 12-inch speaker. This particular amp has the factory Jensen speaker in it, and it's got two channels. You have the normal channel with controls for volume, bass, and treble, and then you have the vibrato channel with controls for volume, bass, treble, and then vibrato speed and intensity. The amplifier also has a gorgeous built-in spring reverb. An interesting fact is Fender called the modulation effect in here vibrato. Now, vibrato refers to pitch modulation. What's actually happening in a Deluxe Reverb is amplitude modulation, so it's the volume going up and down if you use the vibrato. So technically it should be called tremolo, but they called it vibrato and everyone knows it as vibrato. I'm going to be using the vibrato channel today. Kind of the classic way to set up an amp like this is to get it right to the point where it starts to break up. Now, some Fender amps need to be very loud and you really have to crank the volume for them to start to break up, something like a Twin or a Bandmaster. However, the Deluxe starts to break up relatively early. So I like to run mine with the volume control on about 3 or 4, which is quite loud in a room. It's definitely loud enough to do a pub gig. And then depending on the guitar I'm playing, I'm probably going to set the bass quite low and the treble somewhere between 6 and 7. If I was playing a humbucker equipped guitar, I'd actually have the treble up around 8 or 9 and the bass at maybe 1 or 2, but I'm going to be using a Fender Stratocaster today. So I'm going to have the bass at 3 and the treble at 6. I'm going to mic this up with a Sennheiser MD421 and give you a very quick example of the core sound that I'm using. Then I'm going to connect the VP4 in between my guitar and the Deluxe Reverb and give you a very quick demo of the preset that we're about to make, and I'm going to switch everything on the VP4. Then we'll break the preset down. Let's build the VP4 preset now. And before you add any blocks, I want you to ask yourself, what are your 4 favorite effects pedals? Once you've figured that out, select from the blocks on here and treat them like real world pedals. So in a situation like this with a clean or cleanish Fender amp, the first thing that I'm personally going to add is a compressor in here. This is generally going to make things easier to play in a live context, but it's also going to provide more consistent levels, especially if I'm swapping guitars during the gig. Next, let's have a source of distortion and we'll add a drive block. I love having some kind of modulation in here just to make the sound a little more interesting and add some movement. So I'm going to select a chorus block. And then finally, I love having some type of echo or reverb. Since the Deluxe Reverb has a built-in spring reverb that sounds excellent, I'm going to select a delay right at the end here. And we're going to bypass all of these blocks to start out with. Let's start by dialing in the compressor. The Studio Feedforward compressor to me sounds fantastic. All I would do is turn up the ratio on here. You could also try out one of the pedal compressors, or if you want a little bit more character, try the JFET or analog compressor in there. But a ratio around 4, especially with single coils, I think works really well into a deluxe. I'm playing on the neck and middle combination here, and I want a kind of funky, clean sound. Now that's actually boosting the level ever so slightly, and it's providing an extra little bit of grit. In my experience, if you want a usable clean sound live, you actually want to have that little bit of grit on there. It's going to provide some extra texture to the guitar sound, and it's going to help it cut through a mix that little bit better. So the compressor on there, start with the Studio Feedforward compressor, ratio around 4. That's a great place to start, but you can of course experiment with other compression types. So we've got that dialed in. Let's just go in and dial in each of the other blocks on here. So let's start with a drive on here. And this is where you have to ask yourself what sort of distortion you need for your gig. I think if you want something that sounds like a classic rock crunch, something like the Box O Crunch can work really great. It's basically a Marshall style distortion in a pedal. Let's have a listen to what it does. That's kind of changing the fundamental character of our Fender amp. If you want to experiment with different types of drives, you can use the channels in here. So to me, a great drive that can kind of push the existing character of the Fender amp on there is something like the Clone Chiron or one of the Tube Screamer derivatives. You know, Tube Screamer is a classic choice. So if you took the T808 OD, kept the tone low and turned the drive and level up, you can get a great bluesy tone out of this amp. This one, especially on the neck pickup, can give you that classic 60s vibe. Or if you want something a little more subtle to essentially enhance the underlying character of the amp, the Nobelium OVD1 based on a Nobels ODR1 is great. You know, this is the classic choice for country players. So we've populated the drive block with 4 different choices, which is a great option to have in a live setting. If you're playing different genres or different styles, having different distortion textures can be really important. And of course, when you bypass the drive block, you have a great underlying sound with just a little bit of grit on there. For chorus, this is, again, where personal taste is really important. I would suggest using 2 channels in the chorus block. Because we're running in mono, let's set both of them to the analog mono type in here. And a great rule of thumb for chorus is as the rate goes down, the depth goes up. So let's have one of these chorus modes with a low rate around 0.5 hertz, and we'll turn the depth up to compensate. Then on the other one, we'll do the opposite. We'll have a faster rate to almost get a kind of rotary style sound, and we'll turn the depth down. Let's have a listen to these 2 chorus options on our clean sound. Personally, for me, about 90% of the time, I want that chorus sound with the lower rate on there just as a subtle enhancer. So I'm going to leave it right there. Then for the delay, you've got so many great options on here. For me, in this preset, I'm mostly just going to use the delay for my lead sound in combination with one of those drives. And I think a great place to start, especially when you're running into the front of a clean or cleanish amp, is the mono tape delay. At the stock settings, I think it sounds fantastic. So let's turn it on, and let's turn on this Nobelium OVD1. We get this. Combination with some of the other effects on there. Now, of course, adjust the mix, the delay time, and the feedback to taste, but that mono tape has quite a dark character on there that won't clash too much with the core sound of your guitar, which I personally really like. So we've got our core sounds in there. What we want to do next is organize this into scenes so that we can seamlessly switch between different combinations of effects. And there's 4 scenes available on here. So the first thing that I want to do is I want to set up my clean sound, which I'm going to have a little bit of compression on here and a little bit of chorus. And we're going for that lower rate, higher depth with the chorus. I can just kind of call this my clean sound over here. So I'm pretty happy with that. Once I've got it, I can hit save. Next, let's go for just kind of a little bit of drive on there. We remember we were using that Nobelium drive for that. So that was channel D of the drive block. I'm not going to have any other effects on that one. Let's just save that. In fact, we should name it. Let's just call it Crunch over here. So we've got that one set up. For scene 3, on this, what I wouldn't mind having is just a different distortion character. Maybe we want something a little bit dirtier on here. So let's use that box of Crunch. I'm going to call this maybe Crunch Plus or something like that. Very imaginative on my end there. So this is going to give us even more drive. And then on scene 4, I want this to be my lead scene. So I'm going to have my delay on over here. Will I have the chorus on? Why not have the chorus on right there? We'll turn the compressor off, but let's use one of these other channels, either the T808 if I wanted a bluesy sound, or the fuzz on here. I'm actually going to go for the fuzz on here. I want a big, thick lead sound. So we will name this lead right there. I'm going to capitalize the L because of my borderline OCD. Let's hit save on that. And now I can select from my clean sound, a crunch sound, slightly more of a crunch sound over here, and a lead sound, which should hopefully cover everything that I would need in a gig. Let's hear these sounds, and I'll switch them from the VP4. things to think about would be extending what we did with the channels in the drive block and the chorus to some of the other effects in there. Furthermore, if you watch my tutorial video on the channel select function, you could toggle between using a scene per song and then effects mode on the VP4. So each scene could be set up with all of these blocks on different channels, and then you could switch over to effects mode and turn them on and on individually if you would like to use it like a traditional pedal board. But to me, the advantage of scenes really opens up the power of the VP4 versus a traditional pedal board. On a traditional pedal board, you'd have 4 individual effects in this setting, and they would each do one thing. Here, you can have 4 effects blocks, but 4 different options per effect. So you could really expand on this approach if you like. You could totally customize it, or again, you could just use the scenes like, say, a MIDI switcher to make it easier to go between different sounds per song. Now, there are several other considerations when you're setting up for your first gig using a small, clean combo. A big factor in the overall tone that the audience hears is going to be the microphone used. And on today's video, I've been using a Sennheiser MD421 microphone. Probably the most popular and common microphone would be a Shure SM57. What I would recommend is, if you are miking it up yourself, avoid placing the microphone straight onto the cone of the speaker. You can move it slightly to the side a little bit, you can put it off axis, and you can essentially get a slightly less shrill tone out of your rig that way. You want a nice balance between having the kind of proximity effect of a close mic'd amplifier as well as the amp in the room kind of sound. And if you're playing small venues, a lot of the time they won't actually mic the guitar amps up, and something like a deluxe, you can crank it and get some really good volume out of it before it starts to break up, or you can really push it and get some actual breakup out of the amp and then tailor your effects selection on here to work with that slightly driven amp. We will talk about driven amps and rock crunches in the next video though, where we build a rig around a classic Marshall amp. Before we do that, let me know any questions or suggestions in the comment section below. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on how you're using the VP4 with a traditional amp, or any requests for future videos in this series. Have a great day, and I will see you next week for the next installment.